Hi, this is the training for the Department of Family and Children's Services overview so that you can get a better understanding about the Department of Family and Children's Services. My name is Judi Oleari, and I am a Differential Response Coordinator 2 for the Department of Family and Children's Services. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I've worked with the department for over 25 years. What is Department of Family and Children's Services? Also known as DFCS. Department of Family and Children's Services is a government agency that works with children and families to protect children who have been abused or neglected. There are several different paths that families can be referred to. They can be referred to Path 1, which is voluntary services, or Path 2, which is also voluntary services, but an emergency response social worker is attached and makes the referral. These services are not court mandated, and they are voluntary services. These services are provided to ensure the safety and well-being of our children. Children come into the system of the Department of Family and Children's Services for many different reasons: sexual abuse, physical abuse, general neglect, emotional abuse, and caretaker absent. The most serious abuse are sexual abuse and physical abuse. And generally in those referrals, children are removed and the cases are being investigated. The role of the social worker is to meet with the family and children and to do a thorough assessment. They are to collect information by interviewing family members, collateral people such as court, school, principals, teachers, doctors, nurses. The social workers do an assessment to determine if the children can be returned home or if they should remain out of the home and the case be further investigated. Social workers will make interventions when necessary and will intervene in the lives of families as needed. Social workers work with families and children as well as all collateral people such as the schools and law enforcement, and they prepare court reports and develop case plans with the families. And while I'm giving this presentation, please remember to refer to your PowerPoint presentation that you have in front of you. Please look at the Department of Family and Children's Services flow chart. The flow chart is a good way to understand the entire process of social services because it is a very complex process. And so this takes you through the very beginning when a referral gets called into the Child Abuse and Neglect Center. The Child Abuse and Neglect Center is also known as the CAN Center, and that's where all our referrals go through. What happens is a social worker will answer the phone and take the information from a mandated reporter or a non-mandated reporter. That information gets inputted into our computer database, and several things can happen. It can either get evaluated out, and that is a Path 1, and it would go to me, which is differential response. I would review the referral and determine if it indeed was a Path 1, and then I would refer it to one of our community partners. We have 3 community partners. There's Gardner, EMQ Families First, as well as Unity Care. So the referral would be referred to one of our community partners. It could also go to Path 2. Path 2, the referral would be given to an emergency response social worker. It would either be an immediate referral, which is an IR, or it would be a 10-day response. If it's a 10-day response, the assigned social worker, which is an emergency response social worker, has 10 days to respond to the allegation of abuse or neglect that's been called into the Child Abuse and Neglect Center. If it's determined that it's a Path 2, that means that the referral would be closed and it would be referred to one of our Path 2 coordinators, and that Path 2 coordinator would refer it to one of our community partners, as I do as a Path 1 coordinator, either Gardner, Unity Care, or EMQ Families First. There are instances that we cannot keep the children in the home and the children would be removed. Social workers, emergency response social workers cannot remove children. There needs to be a police officer involved. And if children are removed by the emergency response social worker, it then would go to a dependency investigator, also known as DI. And we use a lot of acronyms in social services, and so it would be really important when working with your social worker as a child advocate that you ask for clarification if any acronyms are used. So the dependency investigator would be receiving the referral. The children have been removed, and they will be investigating the case. They'll be interviewing the child, talking with the police officer, interviewing the parents, and making a determination if the child would be safe if returned home. If they find that the child is safe to be returned home, they could look at either returning the child home and closing the referral, returning the child home and having court involved, or not returning the child home and filing a petition on behalf of the child. Once a petition is filed, you have a detention hearing. And at that detention hearing, the family is present, the child is present, if the child is at least 6 years or older, and the social worker is present. And discussion about the petition is handled at that time, and the children or child is detained. And then you have a jurisdictional dispositional hearing, which is also known as a JD hearing, and the dependency investigator does a report based on all the interviews that he or she has done with the family and any collateral people that he or she has interviewed. And all that information is written up in a report, and it is provided to the court. You as child advocates will also be writing reports, and so I strongly encourage you to work on your relationship with the social worker. That's going to be really crucial as a child advocate. You really want to establish a good working relationship with the social worker so that the two of you are working together as a team in the best interest of the child. One of the things that you need to remember as a child advocate is that you are making an incredible impact in this child's life. And your role as a child advocate is very different than the role of a social worker. You will be seen as that child's support person, and that child is going to probably trust you more than they would trust somebody that is attached to the juvenile court system. So I think it's important for you to remember the importance of your role in this child's life. So at that time, the social worker is going to be making recommendations that they feel is best for the child, and you as a child advocate, you will also be making recommendations. So it's really important, again, to forge that relationship with the social worker. And prior to submitting your report, I would encourage you to discuss with the social worker what you plan on putting in your report so that the two of you can be on the same page, because everybody is working collaboratively and we're working as a team. One of the things that the Department of Family and Children's Services is strongly encouraging is the family practice model. The family practice model talks about people working collaboratively and teaming with each other. So you and the social worker would be teaming with one another and working together in the best interest of the child. So there's different things that can happen at court. The social worker could recommend family maintenance, which is court is still involved, but the children will be going back home to the parent, and you will also be involved in the child's life as well. They can also recommend family reunification, and family reunification is anywhere between 6 months and 18 months the family has to reunify with the children. They would receive a case plan, and the social worker would review that case plan with the family And the social worker would also create the case plan with the family, as that's part of the new family practice model. The family would then engage, hopefully, in services, and the child could eventually be returned home at either a 6-month hearing, a 12-month hearing, or an 18-month hearing. If for some reason the parents or parent are not successful in their case plan and they are not able to have the child or children returned home, then we would be looking at permanency planning. And permanency planning is creating a permanent plan for the child so that the child can have permanency in his or her life. We know that children do much better when they have a permanent, stable home environment and when they know that they can rely on this person permanently. There's 3 different types of permanency planning. There's adoption, guardianship, and a long-term living arrangement. For children, all ages, we would definitely want them to be in an adoptive home. So we would always look at locating an adoptive family first. Then we would look at a guardianship. Guardianship means that parental rights have not been terminated like in an adoption, but it's still a long-term placement. And then the last type of placement would be a long-term living arrangement. So now we're moving on to placements. There's a lot of different types of placements that children can go into. We always look at the least restrictive placement. And you as a child advocate, you're going to play a big role in terms of the placement of the child and possibly making recommendations with respect to what would be the best placement for a child. It's important for you to keep in mind and discuss with the social worker what placements are actually available prior to making any type of recommendation. We have very few placements for children. There's over 400 licensed foster parents in Santa Clara County, and out of those 400 licensed foster parents, less than half of them are currently taking children into placement. So we have very few placement resources at this time, which poses a lot of problems in terms of placement of our children. So that's why we are really working towards trying to keep families intact and not removing children, because placements are very, very few and far between. So the first type of placement is the least restrictive, and that would be a placement with a relative or a placement with a family friend, a coach, a teacher, a friend of a friend, but somebody that is close to the child. We would then look at a foster home placement, and there's several different types of foster home placements. There's county foster homes, there are FFA foster homes, which is foster family agency homes, and then there's ITFC homes, which are intensive foster care therapeutic homes, which are also part of the foster family agency. County homes are licensed through the Department of Family and Children's Services. The foster family agency homes are licensed through our community partners, such as EMQ or Unity Care, but it's a foster family agency. And they have a social worker attached, so they do provide additional services to the children. And then the ITFC homes are more intensive therapeutic foster homes. They're similar to the foster family agency homes. However, there's a therapeutic component, and those are generally reserved for children that have any type of behavioral problems. The last type of place, well, the most restrictive placements are group home placements and residential treatment placements. We try not to place children in group home placements because it's not the best placement for children in terms of being able to have stability and ongoing support. Group home placements are generally reserved for children that are 12 years and older, and it's a group home setting. There's lots of different providers, caregivers that are coming in and out of the home. It is a home setting, but there's up to 6 other children residing in the home, and it is not a family situation. Group home settings are reserved primarily for children that have a lot of behavioral problems, that have a lot of acting out behaviors at school, gang involvement, drug and alcohol abuse, as well as children that are being commercially sexually exploited, which is our CSEC population. We find that placing children in group homes that don't really belong in group homes could negatively impact the children, and so we really do leave those placements for children that, or teenagers that really need more structure and support. Group home placements provide a lot of structure because they have 24/7 support and they're being supervised 24/7. They work primarily on a point system approach. Most kids don't do well in group home placements. I worked in the placement unit for about 10 years, and I found that children thrive and succeed and do much better when they're in a foster home placement or placed with a relative as opposed to a group home placement. The other type of placement that's even more restrictive than a group home placement would be a residential treatment facility, which is a level 14 placement. Those placements are reserved primarily for children that have mental health issues and are not able to succeed or do well in a group home placement or a foster care placement. Those children need a lot of therapeutic intervention, and most of the level 14 placements have a day treatment component attached, so the children are getting a lot of therapy. And the last placement we look at is out of county. It's the last resort because we don't really want to place children out of county, because if we're doing reunification, we want to keep children within the county so that the parents can be more successful in reunifying with their children. One of the components to placements is TDMs. You'll hear about TDMs a lot as a child advocate, and you will be encouraged to attend TDMs. TDMs stand for Team Decision Making Meetings, and these meetings encompass the entire family, and everybody gets together and they problem solve about what would be the best and most appropriate placement for the child or children. At the TDM, you would have parents, family members, the child advocate, yourself, social worker, any type of prospective placements that might be interested in the child, therapist, and the child would also attend if they're 12 years or older. TDMs run anywhere between an hour and a half to 3 hours, and they can be very effective in terms of working through some issues and really looking at what would be the best placement for the child. You would have the parent on board, and what we find is when the parents are involved and the parents are participating in this process, the placement tends to be more successful because the child sees that the parent is supporting the placement. And when we have parents supporting placements, children tend to do much better. The sole purpose of a TDM is to look at the child's placement. So every time a child has a placement disruption, then the child would have a TDM. Unfortunately, we have a lot of children having placement disruptions for several different reasons. The placement wasn't a good fit. The social worker or the receiving center may have not had enough time to locate an appropriate placement, and the child's put in a placement where the fit is not good. The child may start having some acting out behaviors, tantruming, having difficulty going to bed at night, acting out at school, and the foster parent may not be capable or ready to deal with those issues, and so the child would need to be moved. Or what we could do in the TDM, which is something that we look at very readily, is we try to see if we can preserve the placement. Preserving the placement is ideal because it keeps the child in the placement with perhaps maybe more supportive services. Supportive services would look like wraparound services, which is a team that would provide support to the child, or any other type of services that could support the child. You as a child advocate, you are a support service for that child. So you're providing supportive services to the child. So it's important for you to remember the important role that you play in that child's life and the type of support that you will be providing to that child. There's various mental health services that are provided to the child. They can receive individual counseling either through Medi-Cal or victim witness, systems of care, which is one of our community-based organizations, can provide that, and as I mentioned, wraparound services or intensive targeted wraparound services. Wraparound services is a program that generally works with children or teens that have a lot of self-harming behaviors, either with themselves or out in the community. So a whole team would be working with the child. You might have a family specialist, a therapist, a family partner. So you would have a team of clinicians working with the child. They would work with the child in the community or go to the child's placement. And the sole purpose is to provide support and support the child so that their placement can be successful and that they can have stability in placement. Intensive targeted wraparound services is one step up from regular wraparound services, and it's a very intensive program. It's a program that provides services to youth that have a lot of self-harming behaviors, cutting behaviors, C-sec behaviors, running away, chronic drug and alcohol abuse, and just youth that are placing themselves in situations where they could be at risk of being harmed. These services are very intensive, and when I mean intensive, I mean that you as an advocate can make a recommendation and the social worker can make a recommendation that the ITWS services participate in the child's life every single day. So they could go out to the home or go out to the placement and provide services daily for the child, up to anywhere between 4 to 6 hours of support a day. They can support the child in the schools, in placement, and in the community. There's also TBS, which is Therapeutic Behavioral Services, and TBS is a service that is time limited. It's up to 60 days, and this is reserved for children that are having behavioral problems such as maybe they're acting out at school, they're having a difficult time getting to school, getting up in the morning, they're having difficulties going to bed at night. A lot of our kids in the system have difficulty going to sleep at night because some of the abuse that occurred could have happened at night when they were getting ready to go to bed or once they were in bed. And so a lot of our kids experience a lot of trauma, and that is exacerbated through nightmares, difficulty sleeping, refusal to go to bed. So therapeutic behavioral services will come into the home and they will work on a specific behavior for that child. And they work with the family and or the foster parent or placement. And they will come in whichever time the placement needs the service. So if the child's having a difficult time early in the morning getting ready for school, they'll come in at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. If the child's having a difficult time going to bed at night and say they go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock, then TBS will come in at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So it's a wonderful service because it really meets the needs of the child and it also meets the needs of the caregiver. The service, as I mentioned, is time limited, so it's only up to 60 days. The other thing that's really important as a child advocate is developing a partnership with the social worker. I mentioned the importance of teaming and the family practice model, and you really want to engage the social worker and have that relationship with the social worker, because the two of you are working collaboratively. So it's really important that if you get information about the child, let's say the child is on runaway, and this happens quite frequently, that our children or youth will call their advocate over calling the social worker, because they have a very trusting relationship with the advocate, because the advocate is not attached to social services per se. So it is important to let the social worker know that the child has called, that the child is safe, that the child is doing well. And this information is important for the social worker to have, because remember, the two of you are working together, and you're working together in the best interest of the child. A lot of advocates will ask, how much information should I disclose to the social worker? You want to disclose as much as possible, but also you want to maintain your relationship with the child. So you want to make sure that any type of information you get from the child that could place the child at harm or risk, that information you definitely want to convey to the social worker. But again, it's really encouraged and strongly recommended that you develop a good relationship with the social worker. And again, one of the things to keep in mind with respect to building that relationship with the social worker is you don't want to have any type of surprises. So prior to court, I think it's very important for you to convey to the social worker what you will be recommending. I have seen from time to time attending TDMs that the social worker and child advocate were not on the same page. And it's really important that the two of you are on the same page. And if you're not on the same page, it would be important for the two of you to sit down and talk about what the differences are, because the child will see this and it could create some problems down the road in terms of the relationship building. The other thing that's important, and one of the things that a lot of the child advocates ask, is what's the best way to get a hold of a social worker? Social workers are very difficult to get a hold of. They're carrying anywhere between 25 and 30 cases, and so that means they have anywhere between 25 and 30 families to see in a given month. So they are very busy. The best way to get a hold of a social worker is to contact them via email. Social workers will always respond to email. I even have I get a hold of social workers better through email than I will on the telephone. So I would encourage you to email social workers. The other thing advocates will talk about and ask is, how much information, can I disclose to the social worker? Or, I don't want to ruin that relationship that I have with my child. I want the child to be able to trust me and rely on me. I would say you should consult with your supervisor. And I think it's important, as I mentioned, that if there's any information that your child gives you that could place a child at risk or harm, then that information needs to be conveyed to the social worker, and you can let the child know that you will be conveying the information. So I think that's it now for our presentation for the overview of the Department of Family and Children's Services. Thank you.